We are heirs to the most glorious heritage ever received. Each one must do his part if we wish to show the nation we are worthy. And I think you all represent that in what Theodore Roosevelt has charged us all to do through service, and service through your ancestors. And when we had the military recognition, thank you for your service. I too served, had the opportunity to go to West Point and be commissioned as an Army engineer. History was not my thing. I actually steered as far away from history as I could, which is why I became an engineer. And after my service, had the opportunity to join the National Park Service, which is all about preserving and protecting our history in these special places of meaning in perpetuity. And when I became superintendent at Valley Forge, that is the time I learned that I had an ancestor that served in the Revolutionary War. And that soldier was on the Commander-in-Chief's guard, was at the encampment at Valley Forge, was at the Battle of Germantown, the Battle of Brandywine, the Battle of Kings Mountain. And it was at that moment that history became sticky for me and became relevant. And it was, the National Park Service became more than just a job. I had responsibility to my ancestor. And seeing you all here, I feel like you're here because you're ancestors and you're here to honor them through your service, through being here, to carrying on their good work that they started for us, which I think is just super, super awesome. I think through our service, we are continuing that unfinished work of becoming a more perfect union. It's not done. It's absolutely not done. It was started 248 years ago, and we continue that work. And I just want to thank you all for being here in Philadelphia, in your national park, here at Independence National Historical Park. And it's my great pleasure right now to introduce one of our super park rangers who works with the public every day, because it's really important that we connect with the public. National parks exist because of the public. They exist because of you, because of your support. Without your support in these places, that National Park Service would cease to exist. These places of importance would cease to exist. So my hat is off to Ranger Dave Powers, who's got a few words to share.
Let's get a quick picture. Andy, will you take a picture of him for our website?
I've done it.
Huh?
I've done it.
It's done. You did? Okay. You are on top of it, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for having me. It is a privilege to be here to talk to you all today. And I'd like to welcome all of you to the Pennsylvania State House. Yes, that is actually the name of this building. Just in case you didn't know, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. This is actually known as the Pennsylvania State House. The name of Independence Hall does not come around until about 1824, when President James Monroe invited the Marquis de Lafayette to come do a tour through America. And in the newspapers, and eventually started coming out, people started referring to the building, especially the room downstairs, the assembly room, as the Hall of Independence. And then it just kind of evolved from there. But even today, this is still known as the Pennsylvania State House. Construction of this building actually started in 1732. If everyone's kind of interested, it's actually the same year that George Washington was born. It took about 3 years to complete the main part of the building you see right here, the long part. So it was finished about 1735. But then the colonial government began to get more and more money, so they started adding more parts to the building. So the wing buildings you start seeing, they started adding around 1736. It wasn't around until the 1750s, though, till we started deciding that they wanted to build a bell tower. And then, of course, in 1753, they put up the State House bell. Yes, right? Pennsylvania State House bell. Of course, about 80 years later, it started getting its name that we now know today, the Liberty Bell. The building itself that you're in, if you were seeing, if you guys are not necessarily familiar with it, downstairs, pretty much right below me, would have been, this building housed all three forms of government for the colony of Pennsylvania, I mentioned the state. So right below us would have been the Supreme Court for the colony of Pennsylvania. On the other side downstairs would have been the assembly room, where the legislative branch would have met. And upstairs here, like we were discussing before, yes, we do today refer to as the Long Gallery. This is where they would have received delegates and held state band dinners and banquets and things like that. The room off to my right over here, this would have been for the Supreme Executive Council. They are the ones who were our executive branch that ran it, and the Executive Council would have a president. And that president is pretty much what we would kind of consider today as far as the governor is concerned. And for all those people who are talking about being descendants of Benjamin Franklin, yes, Benjamin Franklin was technically the governor of Pennsylvania for a little while. But the thing is that I like to talk about when we're talking about Independence Hall is, of course, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were both debated and signed in this building. But is that really the only reason that this building is important? I mean, just 2 documents being signed here. During the war, they signed hundreds upon thousands of documents in this building. So what is it really about this building that kind of makes it so special that we have people who come here year after year, not from just America, but from all over the world? And the best way I can start that out to telling you this is a quote from John Adams. When he said, he actually said towards the end of his life, he said that the American Revolution was in the hearts and the minds of the people even before the war ever began. So we talk a lot about what we think of as the American Revolution. I like to refer to it as the War for Independence, because this is something that takes place between 1775 ends in 1783 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. But there's also the American Revolution. These are sets of concepts and beliefs and ideas that the founders tried to put forth to us, and we still consider to be important today. We start seeing these things start coming to fruition as we start going into the 1770s. There's a lot of issues that are going between Great Britain and America during this time period. A lot of them revolved around various laws and taxes that are being imposed upon society. One of the famous war slogans we get from this time period, I'm sure maybe some of you have heard before: no taxation without
Representation.
See, I told you heard it before, right? But see, here's the thing though, let's think about this for a second. One of the biggest protests that we see that take place before the war is the Boston Tea Party, correct? It's one thing we've all learned about. And this is all in a reaction to some of the taxes that were being placed on tea at this point. But what if I told you that the tea that was being put forth by the British government during that time period actually cost less than it was in Great Britain? It was actually cheaper than the tea that most smugglers were able to get to, because the British government was able to create a monopoly over it. So, is it really the taxation part? I mean, we just heard the Declaration of Independence. They only mentioned taxes once. See, what I fear is we focus on the wrong word. It's not necessarily the taxation part that really bothered the colonists. It was the representation part. It was this idea of losing your voice in government. So what do? They start trying to raise their voices. Demonstrations, protests, petitions being sent over to Great Britain. Yet still, none of these things are actually taking effect. They're actually not changing anything. Many people in this country began to believe that, maybe the only way America could have any form of representative government is they would have to create it themselves. So then, of course, we see what happens. The Siege of Boston starts taking place. It goes on for over a year. But then, eventually, in June of 1776, we have a man that maybe some of you, or at least know, who recognize the Descendant. His name is Richard Henry Lee. And he comes to goes right downstairs to that assembly, that Congress, with a resolution that stated that these colonies of right and ought to be free and independent states. Now we're starting to talk about this concept of independence. Now we're trying to see how it's going to work, how it's going to help move forward. They spend the next month trying to debate this idea. Is this really the best idea for America to do at this point? To do something that no other country had ever done before, had been put to as a colony to break away and form their own government and their own country. Is this really something the best thing that America could be able to have and do? So, eventually, after a couple of days of debate, on July 2nd, 1776, there is a vote, and the vote for independence does pass. Just curious, is there anyone that has a descendant from a person from New York? I'm always curious why you guys didn't vote in favor of it at first. Yes, for those who don't know, it was actually 12 in favor, none opposing, and one abstention. Yes, a week later, New York does eventually vote in favor of independence, But during that time period, now because remember, this is kind of a protest that's still going on, right? If you guys want people to be part of your protest, you have to give them reasons why they're going to be a part of it. So what do? Congress asked 33-year-old Virginian by the name of Thomas Jefferson to write quite possibly one of the most influential documents that the world has seen over the last several centuries with the Declaration of Independence. In my opinion, the Declaration is important for 2 reasons. One, it's going to list all of the reasons why the Congress felt that America should separate their relationship with Great Britain. It goes into 27 different grievances that you just heard, talking about things like the removal of taxation of representation, the removal of jury trials, the closing of representative houses. But in my opinion, more importantly, the Declaration of Independence is a promise. It is a promise that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments will get their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the most important parts that really is overlooked in this declaration. Because you have to imagine, during this time period, people thought that power was at the top. King, queen, emperor, empress, czar, czarina, whatever title you give it, power is here, and they give the little bits of power to everyone else down below them. But see, this is not what the Declaration is saying. The Declaration is saying is that the power is in the people. It is the people that give those little bits of power to everyone else above them. This was a radical idea at this point. After about a couple of days of debate, on July 4th, 1776, look, right there, that was great timing, right? Right job. On July 4th of 1776, the Declaration will be approved. It's actually going to be sent over to a printer. His name is John Dunlap. He had a printing office right over there on 2nd Street. He printed up about 150 to 200 copies, and the next day, they're going to be sent out to all the new states to rally people towards the cause of independence. But then, of course, the war will still have to continue for another 7 years. But this is not the end of it, though. The Declaration is only the beginning. 4 years after the War for Independence ends, there's going to be a call for convention. Right back in here, that very same room that Congress ran the war out of, to develop the form of government that America still has today with the Constitution of the United States. So, let's think about this. If the Declaration is a promise, the Constitution is the attempt to fulfill that promise. I mean, amazingly enough, you ever read the Constitution? 4 pages, right? Not that big, but it talks about a lot, though. Structure of the government, right? 3 branches of government, how we're going to have individuals that will be elected or appointed, how each branch of government is going to have power over the other one. But you know the one thing that he debated the most, more than anything else during the Constitutional Convention, was how are the people going to be represented in government? Now, it took about 4 months to finish it, but eventually, September 1787, there will be 39 delegates that are going to sign their name to the Constitution of the United States on the exact same table that they signed the Declaration of Independence. But the most important thing you have to realize, though, is the American Revolution, it does not end with the development of the Constitution. Actually, in many ways, it's just beginning. See, the Founding Fathers knew that they could not create a government for the future. They had no way to anticipate the needs of future generations. All they could do was try to create a government that would solve the problems of their time. But they gave the Constitution the ability to be changed, altered, amended over time to address these future issues. It's actually known that Benjamin Franklin ran into the wife of the mayor of Philadelphia at that point. Her name was Elizabeth Powell. And Mrs. Powell asked Franklin a question. Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? A monarchy or a republic? And Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it. What do you think he was talking to? I mean, was he just talking to Mrs. Powell? City of Philadelphia? It's the first 3 words of the Constitution. We the people. That's what Franklin was talking to. Not just people of his time, but for people for future generations to come. And we see this throughout American history, all over the country, but even especially in and around this building. 1876, the 100th birthday celebration of the United States. There's going to be a group of women that will gather right there on the front steps of Independence Hall and read what they call the Declaration of the Rights of Women in the United States. And they were led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They were trying to draw attention to the idea that women during this time did not have the federal right to vote. And they were trying to raise up their voices to get that vote. It continues on, even in the 1960s, in the Tower section that we walked into this building. 1963 and 1965, the Liberty Bell actually used to be right there, and there were sit-ins right there at the Liberty Bell that were trying to draw attention to the violence that was taking place in both Birmingham and Selma, Alabama. It would be these efforts that would lead to the greatest civil rights legislation known to date in this country with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Even right out here on the corner, that same year, 1965 through 1969, we're going to see demonstrations that are called the Annual Reminder Days. Actually, some of the first gay rights demonstrations that we see in this country. Even today, out of the small section, almost every other day there's going to be some form of rally, demonstration, protest, and not just by Americans, but from people all over the world, using Independence Hall as a sounding board to lift up their voices to what they believe to be social injustice. This is the American Revolution. It is a belief that everyone has a voice in government, that they have the ability to shape the government that shapes them. But in order for us to always remember and to have this happen in the future, we must still remember Dr. Franklin's famous words when he stated, "This is a republic if you can keep it." Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.